We have Mike Tomlin's press conference leading up to our week 14. It's week 14. Game versus the Baltimore Ravens at Baltimore. I've seen, before I get into this really, and this is very quick. I've seen many people say that it does not matter who wins the division, who gets to the playoffs between whoever it is in the AFC North. No matter who wins the division, they're just going to be one and done, which it kind of feels that way. Doesn't feel like the Steelers are very good. Doesn't feel like the Ravens are very good. I mean, maybe if Cincinnati can somehow win it, maybe they'll be that team that's riding high, and maybe they can pull something off. But not looking great for any AFC North team right now. But let's see what Mike Tomlin had to say.
Good afternoon. As always, man, I'll start with a quick assessment of the last performance. And unfortunately, the tape didn't show anything dramatically different than what we saw in stadium. We played 30 minutes of acceptable football, and then, we didn't do what we needed to do in the third quarter and in any of the phases of play. And certainly that put us behind the gun, and we were running uphill from there. I think frustration became a component of it, which is a natural thing. We got a lot of guys that work extremely hard and put a lot into prep. And, we want to win. We want to do what's required to win, but we didn't necessarily express that want to appropriately. And so we kind of talked about that some yesterday as a collective. I own the responsibility of making sure that these guys understand a component of being a tough team to beat is not beating ourselves. We had some penalties, and certainly you're going to have penalties when you play. But penalties of the 15-yard variety, loss of composure and things of that nature hadn't been us. And so that needs to be corrected immediately. We talked about that. And when it's from some of our guys like captains and so forth, guys that represent us at the coin toss, it certainly merits discussion and analysis. And so we went through that, and we look forward to moving on from that. Now, a component of moving on from that is executing better. When you execute better, you make more plays, frustration becomes less of an issue. And so certainly, first and foremost, as we lean in on this week, man, our focus is performing at a higher level, doing a better job strategically, doing a better job of dividing the labor up, and then ultimately letting that lead to doing a better job of play. Really, there's a rhythm to it in recent weeks, particularly in Chicago and last week. And, but it doesn't make it any easier, obviously, to identify and move on from. Certainly, when you have the lead at halftime and you're getting the ball to come out to start the second half, there's generally a good feel there. But we haven't done enough with the football to start second halves, and certainly we haven't done enough to defend the grass once we've turned the ball over. And so that could be descriptive of how things unfolded in Chicago, and it certainly is a description of how things unfolded last week. And so, we talk about it, we learn from it, but equally as important, we roll our sleeves up and go to work. How do you get that synergy? How do you get the confidence? How do you get the cohesion required to win? You tighten up your plan. You delve into things that you've spent more time in and things that you hadn't. You make sure that guys are in position to work in a coordinated fashion in all three phases. And so we're making some very, pointed decisions as we lay the foundation for this plan this week. But I imagine Baltimore is doing similar things. We both sit at 6-6. Both of those positions come with some scars, certainly, but they need to come with some lessons learned as well. And I think the team that displays the ability to apply those lessons best is going to be the team that's going to be in position to control this game and thus be in control of the North. And before I get specifically into Baltimore and talking about their personnel and so forth, just let me say this, man. I really enjoy the structure that is today's NFL scheduling. The excitement associated around these division games, the weight on them, not only for us in Baltimore, but just globally speaking. We felt it a year ago. We had some big games against them in the latter part of the year as well. I think it's good for football. It's good for our fan base. It's good for their fan base. It's an honor to be a part of it. And certainly it provides an edge for us, man, an urgency for us as we prepare. We've been in hotly contested battles with this group in the past, and I see no reason why this weekend won't be the same. There's certainly a lot at stake. From an injury perspective, I'll cover a few things. Derek Harmon can be characterized as out again this week with his knee injury. Everyone else could be characterized as questionable, and when I characterize people as questionable, oftentimes it means limited participation at the early part of the week, and then increased participation as the week goes on, and the quality and quantity of that participation being our guide toward availability. The guys that fall into that category, Patrick Queen with his glute injury, and some other guys with some bumps and bruises associated with play. James Pierre is in the concussion protocol, and I never really try to provide too much color regarding that. The medical experts make that determination, but he's in the protocol and could be listed as questionable as we sit here today. And I'd imagine we got some other guys that lack availability associated with bumps and bruises, associated with play this time of year that could be limited at the top part of the week. But we expect those guys to pick up as the week goes on. And you can characterize Aaron Rodgers within that group as well. Now on to Baltimore. As I mentioned earlier, man, they're familiar with us. We're familiar with them. It creates excitement. It creates excitement around the strategic planning. It's fun to, to have knowledge of this group, but watch how they've evolved over the course of the journey. And we all evolve for a variety of reasons. The elevation of individual players, the emergence of individual players, the attrition component of the game as you miss people and adapt schematically, and from a divisional labor standpoint to make up for that, the return of players and that impact that it has. For instance, on offense, I'll start with Baltimore's offense. At the early portions of the year, they were without Richard and Likely, two major components, if you're familiar with Baltimore, that play major roles in how they function. Likely is an awesome second tight end to partner with Andrews. They play a lot out of two tight end personnel groups, and they're able to get a lot done in the running game and in the passing game. And I think you feel with each passing week the impact of his return and presence, and certainly the same thing with Richard, man. We've dealt with him over the years, man. You get that guy on the field in front of Derrick Henry, man, you got an all-day job ahead of you in terms of minimizing what they're capable of in the running game. And certainly, as we lean in on this week, that's where our attentions lie from a defensive perspective. No disrespect to their passing game, and certainly they got a lot of capable guys there. But we're talking about a legendary runner of this generation in Derrick Henry. We're talking about some schematics and some personnel that really highlight that agenda, coupled with our present state coming off the type of performance that we just came off of regarding the run. I believe that focus is justified and appropriate. But they do have some dangerous people on the perimeter. I like their divisional labor from a receiver standpoint. Zay Flowers obviously is a dangerous receiver. He's good after the catch. He's got make you miss. He's elusive. Bateman and D are veteran guys that know what it is that they're doing. D-Hop, you can't say enough about him in terms of some 50-50 ball matchups and the things that he provides them from a one-on-one perspective. As I mentioned the tight ends when I was talking about the running game, Mark Andrews, man, him and Lamar have been, partners in this thing since they got drafted in the same draft class. I think he's Baltimore's all-time leading receiving touchdown guy. Yep. He's certainly still a major component of what they do in the red area. I think he's got 5 or so touchdowns this year. But the ball goes to and through Lamar. His ability to extend and make plays, his ability to run, particularly in situational moments, is and always has been a challenge. We failed some at that challenge a week ago against Josh Allen, and so for those reasons, man, we're really working with an edge in preparation for this one. Certainly we have a lot of experience in defending them and going against them, but I'm sure they say similar things regarding us. And so with that understanding, we proceed. On the defensive side of the ball, They really did some things to stabilize themselves kind of at the trade deadline. A couple quality acquisitions, one at the safety spot and one at the edge spot to round out some areas where they were really thin. The safety acquisition has really allowed Kyle Hamilton to do what Kyle Hamilton does, which is to play big nickel on first and second down and play around the line of scrimmage and blitz and defend the run and set edges. You get in sub-package situations and more passing circumstances on third down. He essentially plays a dime linebacker spot, and you have to deal with he and Roquan, and they're both formidable, certainly. They're very good underneath defenders and blitzers, and they've got really good schematics that highlight those talents. Another versatile guy, obviously worth mentioning, is Marlon Humphreys, man. He plays outside when Kyle Hamilton plays nickel. When Kyle Hamilton moves to dime linebacker, he plays inside. He's a very versatile guy, man. He's the poster boy for their turnover culture. I think he's got 17 career forced fumbles and counting now. And so ball security is going to be a major component of it. We got to be really fundamentally sound there. Again, he leads that charge. But again, wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention Malachi Starks, man, their first rounder.
Georgia.
He's a center fielder, man, and is doing a really good job patrolling that area of the field, and particularly of late, as I mentioned, with that acquisition, and they're able to solidify some divisional labor. He's been a mainstay in the middle of the field for him and doing a nice job of solidifying that space. You see growth and development in Nate Wiggins in year 2. I think he's playing really good football. He's a tough cover man. I know he went out of the last football game, but as we sit here and prepare today, we certainly anticipate seeing him in a matchup like this and ready to deal with his talents. They do a lot of things up front, man. They use a variety of packages and personnel groups. They've had some attrition up front in their defensive line and edge people, and so they get into some dime 41. They also get into some dime 32. Young draftee out of Clemson, Simpson, is versatile. You'll see him in some dime 32. He'll rush off the edge. He'll act as a hover rusher at times in a hybrid four-man rush. He drops some. It gives him really good schematic variation. You got he and Roquan and Kyle Hamilton down around the box. Some guys blitz, some guys cover. They do a nice job week in and week out of kind of changing those things up. And then certainly when we play these guys, man, special teams is always a major component of how games unfold. They're a really good special teams unit. It's a value system of theirs. Certainly it's a value system of ours. We'll be fighting for every blade of grass in all 3 phases. And oftentimes they come in more chunks in this phase because of the vertical and horizontal grass associated with these plays. And so, man, we got to be really good in that space. Our return games got to provide a leg up for us. Our coverage game has got to be excellent, and certainly our specialists have to be on it. Excited about the prep in terms of what lies ahead with us this week. Excited about getting in front of our guys, starting tomorrow morning, man, and laying out a plan and working that plan and taking it to Baltimore AFC North football with a division lead online. I'll pause and open up for questions.
Mike, when you talk about the frustration, where do you see it manifested? In their play, in their body language, in their behavior? What?
In a little bit of both, really, in all areas, and certainly, I never want people to apologize for caring, and I viewed the frustration displayed last week in that way. Guys were in fight mode. They care. The game wasn't unfolding the way that we desire. They didn't necessarily express it appropriately, and so as a leader, it's about redirecting that and making sure it's channeled in the right ways. But also, how do we move on from that? The source of that frustration is not playing the way that we would like to play. And so certainly putting together a good plan and putting them in position to play well is a component of moving on from it.
What did you learn from the captains in talking to them and what they feel like needs to change?
We have a lot of discussions week in and week out. I generally leave those discussions between us. But certainly I'm open to insight from those guys and assistance from those guys. A lot of those guys been around a lot of football, and when you're in the position that I'm in, you don't care where good advice comes from, you don't care where good ideas come from. That's just the spirit in which I move and have moved for a very long time. I think the longer you're in this business, you understand that. You know, forget authorship or ownership. It's about being right and being ready. And so, man, certainly those opinions are valued.
Like you said after the game on Sunday that the answers were in the building, but a lot of the issues that you guys had on Sunday have been the issues all season. Why have the answers to those issues been so elusive?
Because those same ingredients have produced 6 wins as well as 6 losses. And so, you know, it's about how we cook it this week.
Like one of the things that Aaron mentioned after the game was that he felt like practice wasn't good last week, and that's kind of been a common theme. Is there something that needs to change with practice, or is that feedback that he's given you that you can take into account?
I'm open to doing whatever it is that we need to do, obviously, in the effort to make practice better. Sometimes practice gets challenging, particularly at the early portions of the week this time of year, because of lack of significant player availability, and certainly felt that last week, not making that as an excuse. That's just the reality of our business. I'm sure people that we compete against miss significant players as well. How we navigate that oftentimes during the week is, you know, an example of how we might navigate it during the course of the weekend. And certainly last week, based on the results, were not good enough. And particularly from a defensive perspective, when we lost Patrick Queen, we didn't do a good enough job of managing that component of it.
You mentioned that he thought maybe the cold weather was impacting the quality of practice. Do you consider moving more practices inside?
You know, we generally play outside, and so if the surface is safe, I like to practice in the environment that we play in. But if you lose productivity because of the windage, et cetera, those are just general decisions that you make that's best appropriate for the group. In spirit, you like the group to practice in the environment that they play in, but if it's counterproductive, if it's survival, then certainly you make adaptation.
When you guys have the run fit problem that you guys had Sunday, you know, going up against another big run opponent, where's the line between focusing on the minutia and the smaller details versus maybe looking at a more global approach from a coaching standpoint, how to fix those problems?
I think you approach it from both perspectives. I think you got to put a lot of lines in the water. Certainly, we're looking at strategic global things from a strategy or schematic standpoint, but we're also looking at the division of labor and the positions that we put players in, how we adjust and adapt and communicate, particularly when that gets strained due to player availability or lack thereof. And so some of those things and all of those things are a component of the decision-making process.
Department's helped in that regard.
TJ Watt was pretty frustrated that they seemed to run the same play or similar concept over and over with success. Where were the shortcomings in that particular play or that situation?
It was really good execution by them. Oftentimes it was the final look, but there were pre-snap movement and changes of offensive personnel that disguised it. And so sometimes a play would hit in a particular space, but they would change offensive personnel, requiring us to change defensive personnel, and the person might be different the second time. And so that's just a strategic component of football. Man, they did an awesome job. I don't want to take anything away from them, and we certainly have to be better.
Aside from Harmon's health, which has been a variable, and you mentioned you're open, it will be again this week with his injury. Why have you found that the run game has been at times very good on defense against like Chicago and Jonathan Taylor, and why has it struggled as mightily as it has in other weeks?
You know, I think, you know, you'd have to look at each one of those things individually, the plans, the players available to us, the schematics of those that we compete against. I think that's the challenge and the beautiful thing about this league is that week in and week out, man, you start anew. There's certainly, particularly at this point of the year, some evidence of who you are and evidence of who your opponents are. But from a strategy standpoint, you better start at ground zero. You better build, and that's what we're in the process of doing today and this week in an effort to put out a better performance this week.
You talked about trying to learn some things out the last week with the way Allen ran as opposed to getting Lamar this week. Is there a transferable thing there in the way they approach it with those two quarterbacks? Or is
It certainly is, but they're certainly very different guys. They both have designed quarterback runs as a component of their attack. Lamar is more on the perimeter because of his talents, his elusiveness, his speed. Josh Allen is more downhill because of his talents. He's big, he's strong, he's competitive and combative. But either way you slice it, it's 11-on-11 football. Certainly, they have different approaches to that 11-on-11 football. The differences in the backs have a lot to do with it. Cook is a elusive and perimeter capable and things of that nature. And certainly, although Derek has great speed and when he gets into the secondary, he's a problem. You really want to work hard to minimize his downhill because, man, when he gets downhill on you, you really feel it. That's when he starts bumper carring and bouncing off of people, and you want to eliminate that component of his game. And so there certainly are some similarities, but there certainly are some dramatic differences as well. We'll lean on the similarities. We have experience against competing against Baltimore, and so we certainly understand the differences.
Mike, the way Baltimore ran against you last year in December, did you learn anything what not to do to try to defend that?
Certainly.
Such as?
You know, just how you play apex players, the guys that are halfway between the core of the defense and the perimeter, some of the things you do around secondary rotation and so forth. I think anytime you play, there's an educational process. I think one of the first things that we do on Monday morning or Sunday night, most of the time for me is Sunday, is jot down some just quick initial notes while it's fresh to capture that learning, the adaptation that happens in game, the adjustments, the conversations had formally and informally. I think it's just good business and protocol to formally document that, to collect it and store it, because certainly if you've been in this business any length of time, you know you double back to it sooner, probably more so than later.
When you're having trouble generating offense, why does it make sense to have Pat Fryermuth on the bench?
You know, we got a bunch of guys that are capable. I think we've been through some of these discussions before. We got a lot of capable guys that we have a lot of confidence in. Pat is certainly one of them. Ball didn't bounce his way a week ago, but certainly he's a viable option for us and one that's strongly considered as we work this week.
Mike, you talk a lot about frustration, and you have said you understand the fans' frustration. What is it like for you personally when they're calling for you to go?
You know, in general, I agree with them. From this perspective, football is our game. We're in the sport entertainment business. And so if you root for the Steelers, entertaining them is winning. And so when you're not winning, it's not entertaining. And if you've been in this business, you understand that. And so I respect it. I share frustrations. I understand what makes this thing go, and winning is what makes this thing go.
Mike, will you make any adjustments to the responsibilities of your coaching staff?
Not anything that merits discussion in this setting, no.
Mike, during the draft and free agency, you talked about wanting to be more physical across the board. How do you feel like your team is kind of fulfilling or not fulfilling that goal?
You know, as we stand here today, based on the last performance, not so good. But certainly at different times in this journey, I felt really good about it. And so I think that could describe a lot of the conversations, as I mentioned earlier, when you're sitting at 6-6. For us, it's about absorbing that and understanding that and plotting a course to move forward, but also understanding that the things that happen to us are not vacuum related. It's happening to those that we compete against as well. I'd imagine Baltimore's got similar challenges and issues because they sit at 6-6 as well. And so the team that can manage those things and summons up the good in a more really consistent way is the team that's going to have a chance to control this game this weekend.
Two things about Aaron. Just first of all, simply, how did his wrist come out of that game? How did he respond to playing a full game? And then secondly, did you see anything during the game that was cause for alarm that you need to see get better in practice in terms of the ball handling duties, things like that, before you feel better about what you can do offensively this week?
You know, I feel good about what we can do offensively. I don't think that we're limited in any way. Certainly, we're going to do some things a little bit different to accommodate present circumstances. Like we worked almost exclusively out of gun or pistol a week ago to minimize some of that. It'll probably be less of a discussion this week. We'll see as the week wears on. And certainly, I think he came out of the game, at least physically, from a wrist injury perspective, in a good place.
Coach, you mentioned frustrations. I want to talk about the players' perspective. Would you prefer them flush those frustrations and that kind of passion here and get back to practice and just move on, or carry that and use that as a tool throughout the week?
Both.
The answer is yes. When you look at the problems in the run offense game,
I'm
you guys
really tired
didn't
of
get that
hearing
going
the
against
answer to
those
that.
team that largely struggled against the run.
You know, we got to roll our sleeves up and go back to work, man. Our process for us is a thing for me. You know, oftentimes I get asked, I think, Brooke, you always ask, what gives you confidence? You know, and sometimes I answer it in a colorful way, but it's what we do. It's no different than what you guys do. You guys might write a bad article or a couple of bad articles. Does it lessen your confidence in your ability to write articles the next time? I imagine it doesn't, because you've been doing it all your adult lives. And it's the same for us as individuals or a collective in this business. Certainly our last performance wasn't up to snuff, but I don't know that it lessens our belief in self or our ability to deliver individually and collectively moving forward.
At the same time, though, does it force you to reevaluate the way you go about your job? And you
Does it make you when you write a bad article?
more confidence than you, which is
Certainly it does, because if you got a desire to be great, you better analyze things in a really critical way. You know what I mean? And I think that's what you're asking. And certainly, if winning is our agenda, and it is, we're not going to be hypersensitive to that.
But when you have a stretch where you guys have not played really consistent football for going on 2 months, do you accentuate the bad, or do you say, when I asked you earlier about sort of where you're at, you said, well, these answers also produced 6 wins. So do you have to remind these guys, hey, we played good football?
I think it depends on the situation, what topic is being discussed and who you're dealing with. I think at times you utilize both.
So how do you channel that confidence, Mike? Is it more about we are confident that we can come up with different ways to, as you often say, skin the cat? Or is it more about confidence that we just need to do what we do better?
It's both. It's both. I think that, I think if you're in one lane exclusively, you're not providing enough irons in the fire to produce victory.
How much have you changed your approach during the season this year?
As compared to what?
Compared to what you normally do. When you say, when we write bad articles, what do we do? Well, sometimes I, transcribe differently.
I think the tools that available oftentimes dictate the change, and so certainly this week's plan is going to be different than last week's plan. The opponent is different. The players available to us, anticipated available to us, may be different. And so that's what I mean when I ask, how do you change? Because you change because of necessity. You change because of the challenges are different week in and week out. The materials available to you, whether it's manpower or what have you, change based on player availability and so forth. Conditions change. The environmental component of the game changes. Certainly we're going to be in Baltimore, Maryland, and so that creates a hostile environment on possession downs for our offense, for example. And so you change out of necessity. You're not resistant to change, and I don't know that you spend a lot of time quantifying the amount of that change. You just know that change is required.
Identity as a team yet?
Yeah, 6-6, and I don't like it.
Mike, you talk openly about building your team in the offseason to deal with the AFC North a lot of times. How did what happened at the end of last season in Baltimore impact the way you went about constructing this team this year?
The acquisition of bigs, you saw our emphasis in the draft around big people, fortifying our depth in that area, and certainly it's been required. We've certainly had some attrition in that area. Dean Lowry, Loudermilk, and Derek Harmon has missed a couple of stretches, and so that depth with young people like YA and O and others, man, is significant. You can't run out of bigs. If you run out of bigs in AFC North ball, you're running on the beach, certainly.
Going back to identity, what have you identified on offense and defense as things that you guys do well that you can rely on when things are going off the rails?
I'm sorry?
What have you identified on offense that you, as a team, do well that you can fall back on, that you can rely on?
We're very good at third and manageable. I think we might be tops in the league at 3rd and 3 or less. I don't check some of those statistics. I generally focus on the things that we need to improve upon. But we've been really good at 3rd and manageable, and so if we work to stay in those down in distances, we give ourselves a chance to possess the ball more than we have, as an example. Defensively, we certainly have done a nice job in general at taking the ball away. Culturally, we know what a big component of the game that is, and so what can we do to fortify that component of our game again this week to make sure it's an aspect of our portfolio as we work to engineer victory, just to name a few. But again, when you're trying to be great, when you're trying to win games this week, you better be focused on things that you need to fix first and foremost, and not seeking comfort relative to the things that you do well or you've done well.
Slay was a healthy scratch on Sunday. Does he have an opportunity to earn his way back on the field, or what went into that decision?
You know, really, it was less about Slay, and it was more about getting an opportunity to
so much
see
for that. Bye, Slay.
Asante Samuels. He's a global NFL starter type who's been on our practice squad. This time of year is attrition sets in. You step into stadiums week in and week out. Things happen, and we certainly wanted to have an opportunity to see him in stadium before we maybe had to make a decision on him, before someone else forced our hand regarding decisions. And so it was about that for us. Slay has missed some time due to a variety of injuries and so forth, and it was about getting a look at that guy that started a lot of games in this league, and we did, and we liked some of the things that we saw, and we'll make decisions about how we divide the labor up a little later in the week.
You said Rogers is questionable. Who do you call on if he's out? Is it Rudolph, Howard?
You know, I didn't say he was questionable. I said you could describe him as questionable at this point in the week, and by that I mean his participation might be limited at the early portions of the week, and I really hadn't pondered not having them at this juncture.
Mike, there were a number of leaders who said players need to look in the mirror. Do you feel like you have a group of guys that will look in the mirror, that will take ownership?
I do, and because I think the basic premise that we start with in terms of assembling a group, and it's whether it's draft or free agency, is we like good men who happen to be good at football. And then secondarily, we like men who absolutely love football. And we believe that those two attributes really lend itself to the discussion that you asked about. The ability to assess, the ability to absorb, the ability to dig in when things get difficult, I think are a little bit easier when you got good people and we got people that love what it is they do.
The younger guys on your roster that fall into that category.
Most of them.
Mike, with Robert Jones, and how do you feel like Andrews Pete played, and will he start again?
I thought he was solid, and he will.
What did you find out about?
I'm sorry?
Robert's out for the year? Is that the
He's on IR, and so he's out for this week.
What did you find out about Broderick's injury? Because at this time last week, he was just a week-to-week thing.
It still can be characterized as week to week. I don't know that I have any definitive information on the extent or the length of the timeout, and so I don't want to give you guys misinformation. When I get it, I'll give it to you. But certainly you can classify him as out because obviously he's on IR.
When the negativity presents itself in the stadium in the way that it did on Sunday, your players are not immune to it. As a coach, do you want them to lean into that a little bit, or do you try to or you want them to block it out?
I don't know that you have meetings regarding it. You know, I don't think any of us prepare for failure. Sometimes you're faced with it and you deal with it, but I don't know that we strategically plan for negativity in the ways that you ask.
Anyone else? All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank Christ. Okay, I'm falling asleep, so I didn't have that many notes, so I do apologize. Looked bad watching the game live and looked bad after watching the film, so that's great. We didn't, and we also did beat ourselves. We didn't lose because we beat ourselves, but we sure didn't help it. Bad second halves just all throughout the year. Harmon out, everyone else is questionable. Patrick Queen has a glute injury, so his butt, I guess. Pierre's concussion protocol, who knows how that's going to go. Obviously, Baltimore's a familiar opponent. Them being in the north. By picking up Gilman, I think that's his name, or trading for him, I should say, from the Chargers, that you can play him, you can play their rookie safety, Starks. They can kind of do what they need to do, and that lets Kyle Hamilton roam around, which is what he does very, very well. It just kind of seems like next man up is failing. It's like Harmon gets hurt, and now we can't run, or we get run all over. Like, the first couple of games he missed, we got run all over, and then it settled down a little bit. And now it's terrible again. So maybe Derek Hartman, you hate to say he's the key, but between him, Patrick Queen, Deshaun Elliott, maybe it's just finally reaching that breaking point. Samuel's in, Slay is out. And this is a real opportunity for Asante Samuel to prove that he belongs. And I was talking about this with my cousin, right? And obviously at this point, Asante Samuel was still on the practice squad. But I said, it's, kind of like a no-risk move or a very, very low-risk move, because whether or not he signs to the 53, you would essentially get dibs. Like, if he were on the practice squad, you're just going to sign him to a futures deal, which gets him in camp. And then, let's say he was on the 53. Okay, you get first dibs at trying to sign him again, which again puts him in training camp. So just because, it was only practice squad, we're like, hey, he could still be on the team 365 days from now. Andrews Pete at left tackle again will start. And then Broderick, he's just week to week with that neck injury. Though it's kind of a dumb question. Like, you must not know he's on IR. Because if you know he's on IR, why are you asking the fucking question? It's just dumb if they didn't realize he was on IR. That's it. I'm going to bed. See all you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. And hit the like and subscribe.